If everything is going to go all digital anyway, most people will just go to where they're treated best, even if that means switching platforms. And that's actually what they're doing. Console is dying. Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage. I'm dealing with a summer cold, so yeah, bear with me. But I just think it's been interesting to see what's been going on with PlayStation 5 and Xbox, and even Nintendo as well. Because I think it's becoming apparent to the people that are last to the party, figuring out that console really doesn't hold a candle to everything else that's out there. Mobile is the biggest platform. Steam is massively increasing its revenue year over year, and also its player and user base. And a lot of companies, too, are basically just making games for PC. It's almost 70% of the market now. So we're going to go over some stuff, but I think it is cool that the player base, generally speaking, is waking up, because we're at a point now where PlayStation and Xbox are both making changes. Well, and so is Nintendo. All three of them are making changes that are feeling anti-consumer, raising the wall, the garden, to try to keep the players in, to not let them see outside. And those that actually do, well, they end up moving on. A lot of them. They either quit, go back to retro, or go to PC, which is the majority. Just alone in 2025, it was estimated that 19 million users were added global PC market. Didn't necessarily mean Steam, because there's other markets out there. But that 19 million people switched over in just 1 year. When we take a look over the last several years, for console, regardless of what platform you're looking at, maybe there's been really good adoption, maybe there's been a really good launch, maybe there's been pretty good sales records, generally speaking, or some improvement. It's generally flat. And it's also behind the previous generation. And while I think Nintendo Switch 2 is, of course, doing a much better job, they're selling roughly 20 million or 21 million consoles in their first year, which is the fastest for them ever. I still think that, well, we're having a burst at the very beginning, and then it's quickly tailing off. That's what we're seeing in Japan. And as soon as that price hike happens as September 1st for pretty much Europe and the United States or the rest of the world, I don't think that demand is quite going to be there, especially as inflation continues to go up. And when we're taking a look at PlayStation and Xbox, well, PlayStation had a ton of console sales basically fall to one of their lowest prices ever, which is insane. I mean, the PlayStation 5 spending fell 43% year over year, and unit sales plummeted 58% year over year. Now, the spending is related on like console spending, okay? People buying the consoles. And for Xbox, it wasn't much better. Hardware spending actually grew 7%, which doesn't say much. Their sales have already been really bad, but yeah, unit sales fell some more, which was another 12%. PlayStation hardware unit sales fell to their lowest in May total since May of 2000, which was 26 years ago. And Xbox hardware unit sales were the lowest ever recorded for a May month, which again was incredibly bad. When we take a look too at like Xbox numbers, it hasn't been great. They basically sold 1.3 million units in all of 2025, which is the worst sales year they've ever had, according to Kepler, Alto, and Circana. Also had a 70% drop year over year in the United States for Xbox hardware, reported late in 2025. And again, the United States is the biggest gaming market, generally speaking, for consoles. It's not anywhere else. If you want the biggest market for PC, it's China, at least right now. It's also very interesting, too, that roughly they have about, at least right now, 33, 35 million units sold, at least according to VG charts. But when we're taking a look at their best year, well, it was 2022. Again, it's when people felt like they had a bunch of money, and then every year it's been falling off pretty dramatically ever since. And 2026 is probably going to be even lower still, which isn't going to be good. Also, too, the Series X is in second to last place out of all of their console generations by a pretty far margin. The 360 had over 80 million sales, which is incredible. Xbox One had almost 60 million, which is a pretty good drop. But yeah, we're barely over 30 million for this one, maybe at 35 if that's actually accurate. But the sales are falling off very quickly. We're also seeing too that between the PlayStation and Xbox generation, well, PlayStation 2 was a very, very good console. We know that. PlayStation 3 was pretty frustrating, and the 360 was one of the better ones that a lot of people remember. And this is when exclusives actually mattered. And so we had this exclusive war really going on and trying to put out the competition. This was PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and this also is PlayStation 5 and Series X. But as we see, is like there's kind of a downgrade to the overall user base. We had roughly about 180 million consoles sold. And now we're looking at, roughly 120. So there's a 60 million unit gap, which is pretty big. And when we take a look again at that kind of data for consoles in the last few years, it's been pretty stagnant. The competition is Steam and PC, of course. When we take a look, they've basically broken their record again at almost 42 million concurrent players in January of 2026, an all-time record high. They also had 16.2 billion in revenue, does not mean profit, through November of 2025, surpassing the entire 2024 fiscal year by approximately 5.4 billion. So they basically made 11 billion the year before, and they're making 16.2 billion this year. That's like 35-40% increase. That is insane. They also have 132 million roughly monthly active users. And that's just Steam. Again, that's not including all the other storefronts or anything. That's just actually what they have. When we take a look, too, at revenue distribution, we're finding, too, that actually most games don't make very much. But again, a lot of them, too, are indie. If you want to be indie, the best place is actually Steam or GOG or Epic Games. Basically somewhere in the PC market. When we're looking, too, at typical hardware, well, we're kind of surprised to see how mid or even weak maybe some of the hardware actually is that people are playing on, because the display that they're using is 1080p. Windows 11 is still the most common, but it's only at 67%. Also, system RAM is 16 gigs, which is what I actually have. Intel processor, and also the most common GPU is a 3060 at roughly 4%, which I would expect that to be a little bit higher, but there's also a lot of GPUs out there. And also the top GPU vendor is NVIDIA. We're probably not surprised by that, but we'd probably also expect that to be a little higher, because I think it used to be in the 80s. But this shows that, that these aren't like maxed out graphics. They're not 64 gig of RAM or massive GPUs, or even at high display rates like 4K, because we've had 4K on PC for a long time. But again, well over half are still using 1080p, which is kind of crazy. We're seeing, too, that the share for the region is that the Asia Pacific is roughly half of all Steam users, and Europe is roughly 22%, and North America is 19%, and then China alone is roughly 700 million PC users. But they have their own system. We got to remember that. But this is kind of insane, because when we're looking at where most of the console sales are, well, they're in Europe and they're in North America. And what if they're waking up, which is what I think is happening? What with what's with what we're doing, and there's been a lot of things that have been frustrating, and there's a lot of people that things are willing to kind of take or accept, maybe though they don't like. But there's a point where people just feel like, no, I'm finished. And there's been more people, I think, this generation that have actually been doing that. And the biggest age demographic, roughly, is about 35, 36 years old, which is roughly the millennials. And they also grew up with console. Well, when they no longer really like the console market, and I guess too, yeah, some of the Gen Zers, especially some of the older ones, we generally grew up with consoles, and I think the older folks, they will stay with where they are, whether that's PC or whether that's console. But I think for Gen Z and for millennials, well, they're willing to change and shift, or they're willing to partake in actually, both types of platforms like PC and console. And so, yeah, when they start shifting and changing, which I think is what's happening, is that, well, all of these things that are happening with PlayStation, with like getting rid of physical media and Xbox not seeming to know what they're doing, and both PlayStation and Xbox, generally speaking, making kind of mediocre first party titles, which usually rate around somewhere between a 7 or somewhere between an 8 on IGN, which sounds good, but again, when that's kind of become the new standard at $70 for a video game, well, you're really waiting for a 9 or a 10. And well, it's cheaper on Steam. There's no online. There's all of these different things, including physical ownership, because you can actually back up your own games pretty easily on Steam. Or you can be on GOG and just own the files directly with a list that they have that you can purchase from. So when the console is awakening, well, they leave PlayStation, they leave Xbox. And I think the reason why Xbox is adding, basically making a PC hybrid or like a PC pre-build, you can think of it like that, is so that they can continue to stay relevant, because I think they understand that the console is actually what's holding them back. That they need to meet players with where they are, just like Steam does. They don't care what you're using, they don't care what type of hardware you're using or what your operating system is. They just, again, want the sales, and that's why they're having a 35 or 40% increase year over year on their revenue. Again, not necessarily their profit. Also, take a look too at some of the biggest games that are actually on console. Well, it's these platform games where it's no longer about a specific game like Call of Duty or Battlefield or something like that. It's now focused on whatever you want to create, whatever you want to make. And we know that this is like Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite. These are huge. And again, you can kind of create the types of games and worlds that you want. But we can easily see here that the increase from 2020 to today is insane. And again, these are daily active users. I mean, at the end of 2020, we almost had 40 million. And today, it's 130? Then that's crazy. And the biggest growth is actually the Asia Pacific. That's where actually a lot of growth is, which is the yellow bar. Also, too, by age, it's not just necessarily kids playing. While there has been growth in that, there's been more growth in actual adults, or at least those that are over 13 years old. They're not adults, but they are older. But this means that players are basically starting young and sticking with it. And also, older players that have never played Roblox are starting to play. I even see that in my own friends list on Xbox, is that there's more and more players that are not playing Fortnite, but they're playing Roblox. And I think that's actually quite interesting. Take a look, too, at Fortnite. They've had a very big peak, right? They have these spikes at the beginning of the seasons, but still, they're working on having millions online at any given time, which is really good for a video game. And again, this operates a lot more like a platform than anything else. But again, I think it's important to remember is that the majority of a lot of sales on Xbox and a lot of sales on PlayStation is, well, they actually have these kind of like platform-like games where they make so much money just from the currency purchases alone that they're not going to remove them. When we take a look at the top 10 games from Circana, they're these long-term platform games that we've had kind of forever. And then there's a few others like Call of Duty or Apex or like the latest game or whatever. But again, we always have Rocket League. We always have Fortnite. We always have Roblox. They're always on there without fail. So really kind of going forward, when we're looking at, just how much it costs, people are willing to shift over to PC with all of the frustration that console has with how much control there is and shifting and lost messaging and just focus on the corporate company instead of the actual user experience. Well, people are willing to go somewhere else, and they are. And again, those that are actually on console, well, they're just focusing on the platform games. They're not focusing on really the new sale, the new game. I mean, First Light by IOI Interactive was really, really good. Had really good sales, but still we find out that it only had about 3 or 4 million in sales. Back when I was a kid or in college, it wasn't very hard for games to actually get to 10 million. but now they can barely get to 5. And that's just kind of surprising to me. The shift is definitely happening, but I think at this point we are at a breaking point. And I think it's undeniable. I was talking about this last year, but I'm bringing it up again because just the backlash, the frustration of just losing physical ownership, which I think is really what that is. It's not just that it's a physical copy. It's that there's a sense of control, there's a sense of ownership, there's something to look at and possess, and it changes something when it's digital only. And for those that say, well, then why go to Steam? It's because they're treated better over there. If everything is going to go all digital anyway, most people will just go to where they're treated best, even if that means switching platforms. And that's actually what they're doing. Again, you don't grow 19 million console players, 19 million PC players in 2025 and almost none in console. Again, PC had the growth, console didn't. And again, when we look at Steam's growth in sales, it's pretty high. And where we're seeing what they're playing on console, well, it's not the big major releases. Again, too, we're finding out with Xbox, with how transparent they're being, is that even the games that supposedly sold super, super well, they actually didn't sell that well to begin with. Like South of Midnight, like Senua. Well, Hellblade 2, we knew they didn't really sell that well. But another one was Doom the Dark Ages. Apparently, that was supposed to be a really good game, sold really well, but again, they lost half their studio because of layoffs. So we're definitely at this tipping point. And I think it's going to continue to get worse. And this is why I've been saying that, at least through different videos in the podcast, is that, yeah, console is dying. It really is going to the wayside, and people are finding out that it's greener somewhere else, that they're treated better somewhere else. And while it does initially cost more in the long run, they don't have to pay online. There's multiple stores that are jiving for their dollar. And so there's more discounts, and the average cost of a game is also cheaper on PC. And I think overall, Xbox will be okay because, again, they've already diversified where they're going to meet players. Whether it's through Roku or a smart TV or a handheld or a console or a PC, they'll be fine because I think they're seeing the trends that are coming. And while there's definitely been mismanagement at Xbox, I think the future of Xbox is that they will continue to have one. But the problem is that PlayStation and Nintendo, they're not competing against other consoles. They're competing against other types of platforms like PC. And I think they're realizing that too late, if they're realizing it at all. And so we'll see what happens. I think ultimately PlayStation and Nintendo, they'll have to accept a shrinking base or ultimately switch over to PC, just like Xbox did. So, which for Xbox, it makes sense because they already have Windows 11. So what they're doing with the Helix is they're just merging the two types of platforms into just one piece of hardware, which I think is wonderful for them. I think that's their best option. Yeah, what else are they going to do? And what's PlayStation going to do? People are really upset about the physical release basically ending in January of 2028. And what they said in response is, it is what it is. We're not going to change this. I'm also finding out for Nintendo, while they've made some changes to how they operate with some of their DRM controls and also with their key cards, I think it's just too late. They've already set up where things are. Players already are frustrated, and now this is just more stuff to heap onto that pile. And so, they're just going to quit. And players are. And I think for, the Switch 2, I think we'll see lifetime sales around 50 million, which is a third of what they had with the Switch 1, which is going to look horrible. And then what they do after that, I don't know. I honestly have no idea what the Switch 3 looks like. And I don't know how they're going to stay relevant. The other thing with PlayStation is they'll continue to be the leading console, but they'll be the leading console in a shrinking market. And the majority of players will still continue to grow into PC. And also mobile too. It's getting pretty amazing what you can actually play on mobile. But here we are at this junction. And so what do you think? Where are you playing? Again, with people that voted, they'd rather just go to PC. And with you guys voting, we're finding out that people really would just rather go to PC. That's 75%. Again, it's only 24 votes. And look out for my polls if you're actually sub to the channel, because I would like to get as many votes as I can, because it's a larger sample size, therefore more accurate. But this is where the split is right now. 8% would go to Switch 2, 17% would go with Helix, and then we're looking at PC at 75%. PlayStation has nobody, at least so far. Other polls that I've seen that are way bigger than mine, thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. PlayStation 6 is very small. It's actually the smallest, which is kind of surprising. The $500 is now seen as the affordable option, which, it could be, but $500 is still $500 with a $100 controller and $70 games. It's still expensive. $1,500 for Project Helix is going to be a ton of money, maybe even be $2,000. We'll have to see how much it costs. But people would rather just spend more and ultimately be happier in the long term, and that's what they're doing. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Not sure exactly what to call this one, but if I've earned it, go ahead and like and sub. Also, promote the video. Let more people see it. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll see you guys on the next one.